I'm Emily, a marketing specialist at a local branch of a large corporation, working on a tight deadline to launch our new campaign for Red Bull energy drinks. My fiancé, Ryan, is a freelance graphic designer, and we just got engaged 2 weeks ago. We're planning a small wedding with our closest friends and family in August. Ryan's best man, Alex, is also a friend of ours from college, and he's been helping us plan the bachelor party. I've known Ryan for 5 years, and everything seemed perfect until last week. When Alex confided in me that he and at least 2 other friends of ours have discovered some suspicious activity involving our mutual groom, but everyone is sworn to silence by threats to their own relationships. I'm not sure what to believe or who to trust anymore. My parents are excited about the upcoming wedding, and I'm trying to keep everything normal for them. We've been going to dinner at the Cheesecake Factory every Sunday evening for the past year, and our favorite server, Mike, always remembers my mom's birthday is in March. Ryan drives a 2015 Honda Civic, which he affectionately calls Bertha, and I've been noticing that he's been taking some long detours on his way home from work lately. It started with small things, but now I'm beginning to wonder if everything is okay. As I was going through my fiancé Ryan's receipts from his freelance work, I noticed a small discrepancy in one of the transactions. He had booked a flight to Los Angeles for a project, but the return date was listed as 2 days after he claimed to have finished the work. I made a mental note to ask him about it, but we were busy planning the wedding and I didn't want to pry. The next day, while looking through our joint bank statements online, I saw a small transfer from Ryan's account to an unknown recipient at a gas station on the highway near his office. The amount was small, around 20 EVs, but it seemed unusual for him to be sending money to a stranger. We usually pay our joint bills together at the Home Depot on Saturday mornings, and I've always trusted Ryan with our finances. Now, I started feeling a creeping sense of unease every time he mentioned going to the gym after work or taking a detour on his way home from meetings in the city. I started going through Ryan's phone records online, looking for any unusual activity. I noticed that he had made several calls to a number that wasn't saved in his contact list. The number was registered to a company, Call A Events, in Los Angeles. I checked the website, and it seemed like a legitimate event planning service. However, I couldn't find any records of Ryan attending or working with them. I made a note to ask him about it later. As I continued to investigate, I started noticing that Ryan's credit card statements were showing frequent purchases at a gas station near his office. The transactions were all for small amounts, around 10 or 20 EVs, and were dated the same day each week. I asked Mike, our favorite server at the Cheesecake Factory, if he remembered seeing Ryan fill up his car at that gas station on Sundays. He said yes, but also mentioned that Ryan always seemed to be in a hurry. I started keeping a list of all the suspicious activity I had found so far. I made a mental note to look into Ryan's work schedule and see if there were any discrepancies. I also decided to do some research on the company, La Events, and see if I could find out more about their business practices. I spent the rest of the evening scouring through Ryan's email inbox, looking for any clues that might explain what was going on. I found a thread of emails between Ryan and someone with the email address, herventslavens.com. The emails were cryptic, but they seemed to be discussing some kind of event or party in Los Angeles. I made a note to look into it further. As I was searching through Ryan's inbox, I stumbled upon an email that made my heart skip a beat. It was from a woman named Sarah, and had been sent to Ryan just a week ago. The subject line read, "Can we talk?" and the body of the email was brief, but seemed flirtatious. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized that Ryan might be having an affair. I tried to push the thoughts out of my head, telling myself that I was being paranoid and that there must be a logical explanation for everything. But as I continued to dig deeper, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. As I scrolled through Ryan's phone records, one number kept popping up, a mysterious, known caller with a single incoming call on the night of our engagement dinner at the Cheesecake Factory. The timestamp matched the exact time we took that perfect photo under the string lights outside. As I scrolled through Ryan's phone records, one number kept popping up, a mysterious known caller with a single incoming call on the night of our engagement dinner at the Cheesecake Factory. The timestamp matched the exact time we took that perfect photo under the string lights outside. I remembered how Ryan had gotten a bit flustered when I asked him to take that photo, and how he had laughed it off as just being nervous. Now, I realized that was probably because Sarah, the woman from LA Events, was calling him right at that moment. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I scrolled through their email exchange. It turned out that Ryan had been planning a business trip to Los Angeles for months, but not just for work. He was supposed to meet Sarah in person. The small transfers to the gas station near his office were actually payments for her to pick him up from the airport. And the frequent purchases at that gas station, those were actually for her to fill up the rental car she had reserved for them. The entire time, Ryan had been lying to me about going to the gym or taking detours on his way home from meetings. He was actually sneaking around to meet Sarah, and I was just a pawn in their affair. I remembered how he had always taken long detours on his way home from work in Bertha, and how Mike at the Cheesecake Factory had mentioned that Ryan was always in a hurry when he filled up at the gas station. It all made sense now. He was just trying to cover his tracks. I stood calm, surrounded by the familiar decor of the Cheesecake Factory, as I filed for divorce from Ryan. The lawyer had advised me to document every suspicious transaction, every deceitful conversation. The charges brought against him were embezzlement and breach of trust. He would be required to pay restitution to our joint account, which he had drained in a failed attempt to cover his tracks. As I finished the paperwork, Mike, our favorite server, brought me a glass of wine with a small note on the napkin. "You deserved better, Emily." I smiled, knowing that I had finally found my strength. I took a sip of the wine, savoring the taste of justice served. The photo we took on our engagement dinner night, the one where he got flustered, now felt like a symbol of his duplicity. But as I looked at it on my phone, I saw not only the deceit, but also the facade we had built together. I deleted it, knowing that I was deleting the past and moving forward. The string lights outside seemed brighter than ever before, a reminder that sometimes truth and freedom can shine through even in the darkest of moments. I'm Emily, a 28-year-old marketing specialist, and I'm supposed to be getting married in 2 weeks. My fiancé, Alex, and I had planned the perfect summer wedding at the picturesque Oakwood Estates, with a reception that would rival any celebrity bash. My best man, Ryan, was also one of Alex's oldest friends from college, and we all thought he was the perfect choice to give the toasts. At our rehearsal dinner on a sweltering Friday evening in late July, we gathered at the Cheesecake Factory on Long Island. I ordered their famous chicken parmesan, while Alex opted for the grilled salmon. Ryan raised his glass to propose a toast, and I was about to join in when he dropped a bombshell: our pastor wasn't actually ordained. I felt a shiver run down my spine as he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Little did I know that this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would make me question everything about our wedding. I stared at Ryan, trying to process what he was saying about our pastor. I glanced around the crowded Cheesecake Factory, hoping someone else had heard him. But everyone was laughing and chatting, oblivious to the bombshell he'd just dropped. I turned back to Ryan, my eyes narrowing. "What do you mean he's not ordained?" I asked, trying to keep my voice down. Ryan leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "I overheard him talking to Alex at the bar last week. He said something about not being able to afford the certification fee." I felt a knot form in my stomach as I remembered our pastor's smooth talking during the rehearsal earlier that day. He'd been so convincing, so confident. Now, I wasn't so sure. The waitress arrived with our food, and I mechanically picked at my chicken parmesan, my mind racing with questions. Who was this man we were trusting to marry us? I stared at Ryan, trying to process what he was saying about our pastor. I glanced around the crowded Cheesecake Factory, hoping someone else had heard him. But everyone was laughing and chatting. Oblivious to the bombshell he'd just dropped, I turned back to Ryan, my eyes narrowing. "What do you mean he's not ordained?" I asked, trying to keep my voice down. Ryan leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "I overheard him talking to Alex at the bar last week. He said something about not being able to afford the certification fee." I felt a knot form in my stomach as I remembered our pastor's smooth talking during the rehearsal earlier that day. He'd been so convincing, so confident. Now, I wasn't so sure. I excused myself from the table and stepped outside to call Alex. I was waiting for him to pick up when I noticed the pastor standing by the door, chatting with a waitress. He glanced at me and smiled, but his eyes seemed to flash for a moment, and I saw something there that didn't quite add up. "Hey, Emily," he said as I hung up on Alex's voicemail. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile, trying to play it cool. "Just needed some fresh air," I said. "You know how it is?" Back inside, I couldn't focus on the conversation. I kept glancing at Ryan, who was trying to make light of the situation. But I knew this wasn't a laughing matter. I started keeping a list of everything that seemed off, scribbling notes on a napkin as I tried to process it all. The pastor's lack of ordination was just the tip of the iceberg. What else didn't we know? I glanced around the table, noticing that our friend Sarah was being unusually quiet. Was she in on this too? I excused myself again, this time to use the restroom. As I stood at the sink, I caught a glimpse of my wedding dress hanging in the locker room. It was a beautiful lace gown, but something about it looked off. As I stood there, staring at my wedding dress in the locker room, I noticed that the lace was torn in a strange pattern, tiny little cuts that seemed to spell out a single word: abandon. As I stared at my wedding dress, the torn lace spelled out a single word: abandon. I remembered the strange conversation with our friend Sarah earlier that evening. She had been quiet and distant, but I had brushed it off as pre-wedding jitters. Now, I realized she was trying to tell me something. I recalled her whispering, "Be careful with Pastor John," before quickly changing the subject. I replayed the conversation in my head, wondering what she had meant. Suddenly, the pieces fell into place. The pastor's lack of ordination wasn't just a minor issue, it was a symptom of a larger problem. I remembered the strange glint in his eye when he asked how I was doing, and the way he seemed to be watching me throughout the dinner. It all made sense now. Pastor John wasn't just a scam artist, he was a controlling figure who had been manipulating us all along. He had been using his charisma to keep us in line, and Sarah's warning was a desperate attempt to expose him. I felt a wave of shame wash over me for not seeing it sooner. The pastor's true intentions were far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. He had been using our wedding as a way to gain control and manipulate us into doing his bidding. I knew I had to get out of there, but as I turned to leave, I saw Pastor John standing behind me, his eyes cold and calculating. "It's time for the rehearsal to begin," he said, his voice dripping with malice. I left the Cheesecake Factory with Ryan, my mind racing with questions and a sense of unease. We decided to confront Alex about the pastor's true intentions, and we found him in the parking lot, already on his phone. We exchanged a few tense words before he agreed to meet with us at the estate to discuss everything. The rest of the evening was a blur as we pieced together the extent of the pastor's manipulation. The next morning, Alex and I filed for annulment, citing the pastor's lack of ordination as grounds. We later discovered that Pastor John had been using our wedding as a way to fund his own lavish lifestyle, taking advantage of vulnerable couples like us. He was eventually charged with wire fraud and racketeering. The judge handed down a stiff sentence, ordering him to pay restitution to the victims and serve several years in prison. As for Alex and me, we went our separate ways, but we both emerged from the experience with a newfound sense of caution and respect for the importance of doing our own research. I still remember the torn lace on my wedding dress, a haunting reminder of the fragility of trust and the power of being vigilant. I wanted to follow up on my previous post about the pastor's betrayal at our wedding ceremony. The attention this story received was overwhelming, with many of you sharing your own experiences with clergy misconduct. I'm grateful for your support and solidarity. As it turns out, Pastor John's sentencing hearing is set for next month, and I've been asked to testify against him. It's a daunting prospect, but I feel a sense of responsibility to hold him accountable for his actions. I've also been reflecting on the lessons I learned from this experience, the importance of doing my own research, the dangers of blindly trusting others, and the resilience of the human spirit. Lately, I've been taking long walks along the beach, watching the sunsets, and trying to rewire my trust in people. So I'm Emily, a 28-year-old marketing specialist living in a small coastal town. My fiancé, Ryan, and I are planning our dream destination wedding at the luxurious Bellevue Resort, overlooking the ocean. We hired a catering service called TasteQuest, owned by my high school sweetheart, Alex Thompson. He's now married to my ex-husband's cousin, Sophia, and has ties to Ryan's family. I didn't think twice about choosing TasteQuest until their team leader arrived at our venue on the day before the wedding, bearing a peculiar mix of charm and unease. He seemed off. I brushed it off as nerves, but a nagging feeling persisted. Our wedding planner, Rachel, assured me Alex was a professional with an impeccable reputation. She'd worked with him before and vouched for his exceptional culinary skills. I've been to TasteQuest's events in the past and loved their food, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. As I went through our wedding playlist, I noticed Alex lingering around the area where we store our valuables, a small storage unit on the resort's premises. He asked me about it, saying he needed to make sure everything was in order. I showed him the combination lock, and he seemed familiar with it. I should have kept locking it. As I reviewed the final details of our wedding menu with Alex from TasteQuest, he casually mentioned that they would be delivering a few extra items to our storage unit on the day of the wedding. He explained that it was a special arrangement for his team to have easy access to our refreshments. I thought nothing of it, assuming it was just a standard catering practice. But when I went to check on the storage unit later that afternoon, I noticed the lock had been changed, and there was a faint scratch on the handle that looked like it hadn't been there before. The TasteQuest logo was still emblazoned on the side of the unit, and I remembered Rachel mentioning that they would be bringing in a few extra personnel to help with setup. But now, I wondered if Alex had been telling me the truth about why his team needed access to our storage. As I double-checked the lock, I realized that my grandmother's antique silverware was still inside, and I hadn't given anyone permission to touch it. As I continued to review the final details of our wedding menu with Alex from TasteQuest, I noticed that he kept glancing at his watch. At first, I thought it was just nerves, but then I saw that he was wearing a Rolex, a brand I couldn't afford even with Ryan's good salary. He mentioned that they would be delivering a few extra items to our storage unit on the day of the wedding, and I remembered him lingering around that area earlier. I started feeling uneasy, so I decided to double-check the lock on the storage unit. I went back to the storage unit and found that the lock had been changed just like I suspected. The new lock looked expensive, and I wondered if Alex had installed it himself. I also noticed that there was a small scratch on the handle that looked like it hadn't been there before. I made a mental note to ask Rachel about it. As I was inspecting the storage unit, I saw one of Alex's team members, a young woman with a pierced nose, taking a phone call outside. She seemed to be arguing with someone and her voice was raised. I couldn't help but listen, and what she said made my blood run cold. "Tell him it's been taken care of." "No, I don't care about the schedule. Just get it done." I didn't think much of it at first, assuming she was just discussing logistics. But then I remembered Alex mentioning that they would be bringing in a few extra personnel to help with setup. I started keeping a list of all the strange occurrences and conversations I had with Alex and his team. I wrote down every detail, no matter how small it seemed. I also decided to do some research on TasteQuest's reputation online, but what I found only raised more questions. I discovered that Alex's company had been involved in a similar wedding catering scandal last year, where a valuable item went missing during the event. The couple sued Alex's company, and they settled out of court for a significant amount of money. I started to wonder if this was some kind of setup, with Alex using his connections to keep an eye on me. As I stood in front of the storage unit, I noticed that my grandmother's antique silverware was missing, but there was something else in its place, a small, leather-bound book with my name embossed on it, containing only one sentence written in red ink. "I've been waiting for you." As I stared at the small, leather-bound book with my name embossed on it, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The sentence written in red ink on the first page seemed to leap out at me. "I've been waiting for you." I remembered Alex's strange behavior, his constant glancing at his watch, and his peculiar interest in our storage unit. It all clicked into place. TasteQuest wasn't just any catering service. It was a front for a high-stakes surveillance operation. Alex was being paid to keep an eye on me, to monitor my every move. The extra items they delivered to the storage unit weren't food or supplies. They were tracking devices and monitoring equipment. I remembered the young woman with the pierced nose, arguing on the phone about getting something done. She was probably the one who installed the tracking device in our storage unit. My grandmother's antique silverware was just a pawn in their game, a small price to pay for the real prize, me. I felt a cold dread creeping up my spine as I realized the extent of Alex's deception. He had been playing me from the start, using his connections and his company to manipulate me into a situation where they could keep tabs on me. I thought about all the strange occurrences, all the little things that didn't add up. It was all part of their plan, designed to keep me in their sights. I called the resort's management and reported Alex's activities, and they immediately shut down TasteQuest's operations on the premises. The police took Alex into custody for violating my privacy and attempting to install tracking devices in our storage unit without consent. I also filed a lawsuit against TasteQuest, seeking damages for emotional distress and breach of contract. The court ordered Alex to pay me a substantial amount of money and issued a permanent restraining order against him. As for Ryan's family, they disowned Alex and his wife, Sophia, from their business and social circles. I realized that my grandmother's antique silverware was just a small price to pay for the peace of mind that came with knowing the truth about Alex's true intentions. I decided to change the venue of our wedding and chose a different catering service, one that was transparent and trustworthy. On our wedding day, I felt a sense of calm and security, knowing that I had taken control of my own destiny and protected myself from those who would have exploited me. I'm back in college after a year abroad, trying to pick up where I left off. My dorm room is a messy reflection of my attempts to get back on track, textbooks scattered everywhere, clothes draped over the back of the desk chair. My roommate, Rachel, is a friendly junior who seems to be getting along just fine without me. We're both supposed to move in on August 15th, but I got to campus a day early to settle in. As I'm unpacking, Rachel walks in with a big smile and introduces herself. She's a bit of an oddity, we all know her from mutual friends, but she's never really hung out with our crew before. We exchange pleasantries about our summer breaks, and I'm relieved when she mentions that her family is actually from my hometown. That's when she drops the bombshell. "I know your brother, Alex." My stomach does a flip as I try to place why that name sounds so familiar. Rachel drops the bombshell. "I know your brother, Alex." My stomach does a flip as I try to place why that name sounds so familiar. I glance at my phone, thinking maybe I missed a text from him about moving in early, but there's nothing from him or my parents. I remember him moving out a year ago, leaving behind a stack of unpaid bills and a mess of his own making. He never said where he was going or if he'd be back. I try to push the memory aside, focusing on Rachel's friendly demeanor, but something about her enthusiasm seems forced. She mentions that Alex is actually her friend from high school, and they reconnected over the summer. The coffee shop where they met, Java Junction, is a favorite of mine too. I grab a venti iced coffee there every morning before class. I make a mental note to ask Rachel more about Alex later, but for now I just smile and nod, trying to play it cool, while my mind starts racing with questions about what Alex might be involved in this time. As I settled back into campus life, I found myself thinking about Rachel's comment about my brother Alex more often than I'd like. We exchanged pleasantries about our summer breaks, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. The coffee shop where they met, Java Junction, is a favorite of mine too. I grab a venti iced coffee there every morning before class. I made a mental note to ask Rachel more about Alex later, but for now I just smiled and nodded, trying to play it cool, while my mind started racing with questions about what Alex might be involved in this time. I started keeping a list of the things that didn't quite add up. Rachel mentioned that Alex was her friend from high school, and they reconnected over the summer. But when I asked her more about it, she seemed evasive. I remembered my parents saying that Alex had moved out a year ago, leaving behind a stack of unpaid bills and a mess of his own making. He never said where he was going or if he'd be back. I tried to push the memory aside, focusing on Rachel's friendly demeanor, but something about her enthusiasm seemed forced. I spent the next few days observing Rachel's behavior, trying to catch her in a lie or inconsistency. She always seemed cheerful and accommodating. But I noticed that she never stayed for long periods of time in our dorm room. She'd pop in and out, leaving me feeling like I was missing something important. I started to wonder if Rachel was somehow involved with Alex, maybe even helping him cover his tracks. One evening, while studying in the library, I overheard a conversation between Rachel and another student that caught my attention. They were whispering about something, and when Rachel left, the other student mentioned Alex's name. I felt a chill run down my spine as I wondered if they were discussing something incriminating. I decided to do some digging and started looking into Rachel's past. I discovered that she had a prior conviction for identity theft and was on probation. I scrolled through Rachel's phone records on her laptop, which she had left open on the desk while we were studying. Every call she made to my brother Alex in the past month was exactly 3 minutes and 14 seconds long. The 3-minute and 14-second calls were to the Java Junction coffee shop, where Rachel had mentioned meeting Alex. I scrolled through the records some more and found that every call was made on the same day of the week, at the same time, Wednesday evening, 7:45 p.m. The caller ID was always the same number, but it wasn't listed in my phone's contact book or Rachel's phone. It was a local number, but I couldn't find any information about who it belonged to. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that Rachel had been lying to me all along. She wasn't just a friendly roommate. She was somehow involved with Alex, and these mysterious calls were just the tip of the iceberg. I decided to follow her on Wednesday evening, to see where she would go after making that same call every week. As I trailed behind her, I saw her walk into the Java Junction coffee shop exactly at 7:45 p.m. She met someone in the back corner, and they talked for over an hour. The person was not Alex. It was a woman with a familiar face, my mom's old friend, Karen. I remembered Karen from family gatherings, but I had no idea she was friends with Rachel or involved with Alex. This revelation made everything click into place: the secret calls, Rachel's evasive behavior, and even the way she would pop in and out of our dorm room. I felt a mix of emotions as I watched Rachel leave the coffee shop, wondering what else I had been missing. As I watched Rachel leave the coffee shop, I felt a mix of emotions. I knew I had to report what I had discovered to campus authorities. They listened carefully and promised to investigate further. A few days later, Rachel was summoned to the student union's office for questioning. The evidence from her phone records and my eyewitness account led them to charge her with identity theft and obstruction of justice. Rachel's probation status from her past conviction made this a serious offense. She was forced to move out of the dorm and attend a hearing with a judge. In court, Rachel's defense fell apart as the prosecution presented their case. The judge found her guilty on both counts and handed down a year of community service, ordered her to pay restitution, and terminated her probation early. I felt a sense of closure as I reflected on the experience. I realized that I had been too trusting and naive about Rachel's intentions. The incident taught me to be more vigilant and attentive to the people around me. As I looked back on the past few weeks, I knew that I had learned something valuable: the importance of being aware of my surroundings and the people in them. I'd been counting down the days until my trip to Italy with my fiancé, Alessandro. We were going to spend 2 weeks exploring Tuscany and getting married in a quaint little vineyard. I'd been researching the best wine tours and had already made a list of all the restaurants we wanted to try. But little did I know, my excitement was about to turn into a nightmare. Just as I was packing our bags, a team of forensic accountants from the IRS arrived at my doorstep with an audit notice. It seemed that my fiancé's business partner, his wife, had been embezzling funds from their company, and it all tied back to me, or rather, my involvement in her business ventures. I tried to brush it off as a minor issue, but the numbers were staggering: 12 years worth of tax evasion, totaling over $5 million. I felt a knot in my stomach as I realized that our dream honeymoon was about to turn into a living hell. I had always been diligent with our finances, paying our bills on time and keeping track of every expense. But it seemed that my fiancé's business partner had been cooking the books behind my back. And now, I was the one who would have to face the music. I was reviewing my fiancé's business partner's expense reports for our company, Italian Delights, when I noticed a discrepancy in the receipts from a single vendor, La Bella Vita Café, on Via Roma 12 in Florence. The dates were consistent with our usual orders, but the quantities were triple what we had previously purchased. I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just a simple miscommunication, until I saw the same issue in the following month's reports. Then, I noticed the same vendor's name popping up in my own business email inbox from 3 years ago, with a subject line mentioning partnership opportunities. I remembered vaguely discussing a potential partnership with them but couldn't recall any details. The more I dug, the more questions I had. and the feeling of unease started to settle in the pit of my stomach. I spent the first few days of my trip to Italy in a haze of denial, but as the hours ticked by, I found myself becoming more and more entrenched in the mysteries. I started keeping a detailed list of all the discrepancies I had discovered so far, from the suspicious expense reports to the altered receipts. But it wasn't until I stumbled upon an old email from my fiancé's business partner, dated 3 years ago, that things started to take a dark turn. The email mentioned a partnership opportunity with a vendor in Florence, but when I searched for the company online, I couldn't find any information about them. It was as if they didn't exist. I tried calling the number listed on the email, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message, but no one responded. I decided to dig deeper and did some research on the vendor's address. Via Roma 12 in Florence seemed like a legitimate business address, but when I searched for reviews online, I found a pattern of suspicious activity. The same vendor kept popping up in multiple reviews, often with glowing praise, but the dates were inconsistent. Some reviews were from months ago, while others were from just a few weeks prior. I started to feel a sense of unease as I pieced together the evidence. Something wasn't adding up. I decided to make a trip to Florence to investigate in person. As I sat at my hotel desk, staring at the map of Florence, I noticed something peculiar. The vendor's address was listed as being on the same street as our planned honeymoon accommodations. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that my fiancé's business partner might have been using our own company to embezzle funds. I started making a mental list of all the people who might be involved in the scheme, but one name kept popping up: Alessandro's business partner's wife. I remembered her from a company dinner a few months ago. She seemed friendly and outgoing, but now I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, my mind racing with theories and suspicions. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced around the room but saw nothing out of place. Still, the feeling lingered. I decided to start keeping a closer eye on my belongings, just in case. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but think about all the times I had trusted Alessandro's business partner without question. Now, I wasn't so sure. The more I dug, the more I realized that nothing was as it seemed. And I still had no idea what was really going on. I pulled out the latest expense report and noticed a receipt for La Bella Vita Café with the same date and amount as the one from 3 years ago. The handwriting was identical, but the ink looked fresher. I turned it over and found a name scribbled on the back: A. As I stared at the receipt from La Bella Vita Café, my mind racing with questions, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The vendor's name was the same as the one mentioned in the email from 3 years ago, but this time it was accompanied by a photo of a woman I recognized, Alessandro's business partner's wife, Mrs. Bianchi. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized that she was the one who had been using our company to embezzle funds, and that my fiancé had been in on it all along. I remembered now why I had seen her at the company dinner, how she had seemed friendly and outgoing but had always seemed to be watching me. I recalled the times Alessandro would receive mysterious phone calls and excuse himself for hours, only to return with a smile on his face. It was all a ruse, a way to cover their tracks while they drained our company dry. The expense reports, the altered receipts, it all made sense now. They had been using my own business to launder money, and I had been unwittingly complicit in their scheme. The weight of this realization crushed me, and I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. I knew I had to get out of there, to leave Alessandro and his partner behind before they could hurt anyone else. I packed my bags, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what I had unknowingly gotten myself into. As I walked out of the hotel room, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, a woman who had trusted the wrong people, and who had almost lost everything because of it. I sat in the courtroom, watching as Alessandro's business partner, Mr. Bianchi, was led away in handcuffs, charged with tax evasion and grand theft. The weight of his crimes was staggering: over $5 million in laundered funds, funneled through my own company. I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, but also a sense of closure. As I packed my bags to leave Italy, I couldn't help but think about the vendor on Via Roma 12, La Bella Vita Café, and how their name kept popping up in every discrepancy I found. It was all so neatly tied together, a web of deceit that I had almost fallen into. I thought back to the email from 3 years ago, the one with the partnership opportunity that seemed so innocent at the time. Now it made sense why Alessandro's business partner had been so eager to involve me in their schemes. But I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, and I knew exactly what I had gotten myself into. The judge's words still echoed in my mind: a pattern of abuse of trust, and a clear case of tax evasion. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It was done. Justice had been served. I was getting ready for my own wedding, a small ceremony at the local community center with my fiancé, Alex, by my side. We had chosen the same day as our first date 3 years ago, a bright and sunny Saturday in June. My dress was still hanging on the back of my closet door, a pale blue strapless number from David's bridal that I'd tried on with my mom 6 months ago. Alex had promised to take me to the justice of the peace after the ceremony, but I hadn't expected him to actually follow through. He'd been distant and preoccupied lately, working late nights and barely returning my calls. I pushed the thoughts aside and focused on the intricate lace trim on my veil, a gift from my sister who was getting married next summer. It was supposed to be a beautiful day, but I had a feeling something was off. As I was finishing my hair, Alex texted me that he needed to take care of something and would meet me at the community center in an hour. The next thing I knew, he was standing at the altar, staring out at the crowd with a look on his face that made my heart sink. And then he said it. "I'm sorry, but I've realized I've made a huge mistake. I'm in love with someone else." The room went silent, and all eyes were on me as I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I should have kept locking the door to our apartment, where we'd spent countless nights laughing and planning our future together. But it was too late now. I checked my phone for what felt like the 100th time, but Alex still hadn't texted me back. I was starting to get worried, glancing at the clock on the kitchen wall, 10:45 a.m. Exactly when he said he'd meet me at the community center in an hour. The sunlight streaming through the window highlighted the faint scent of my favorite perfume, Calvin Klein Euphoria, lingering on my dress from earlier. I took a deep breath and tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself he was probably just running late because of his work meeting the night before. But as I put the phone down, my eyes landed on the stack of wedding invites we'd received last week from our friends at David's bridal. Alex had specifically asked me to RSVP for both of us, but now it seemed like a strange oversight. Suddenly, I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that Alex wasn't the only one who was supposed to be getting married today. As I stood in the community center, trying to process Alex's words, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I glanced around at our friends and family, who were all staring at us in shock. My sister, Sarah, was frantically waving at me from across the room, trying to get my attention. I forced a smile and mouthed "I'm okay" to her, but inside I was reeling. The first thing I noticed was that Alex's wedding ring was gone. I remembered him putting it on earlier that morning, but now it was nowhere to be seen. I felt a pang of sadness as I realized he must have taken it off before walking out on me. I started to wonder if there was someone else involved, someone who had been influencing him. As I looked around the rooms, I spotted Alex's best friend, Mike, trying to sneak out unnoticed. He caught my eye and quickly looked away, but not before I saw the guilt etched on his face. I made a mental note to talk to him later. I checked my phone again, and Alex still hadn't texted me back. I was starting to get worried, but then I remembered that he had mentioned being busy with work. I tried to brush off the feeling of unease and focused on getting through the rest of the ceremony. As the guests began to murmur and try to make sense of what was happening, I noticed that Alex's fiancé, Rachel, was standing near the back of the room, looking pale and shaken. She caught my eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry," before quickly looking away. I felt a surge of anger towards her, wondering if she had known about Alex's infidelity all along. I started keeping a list of everything that didn't add up. The missing wedding ring, Mike's guilty expression, Rachel's cryptic apology, it all seemed too coincidental to be just a simple breakup. I decided to do some digging and see if I could uncover any more secrets. I made a phone call to our mutual friend, Emily, who had been part of our social circle for years. She answered on the first ring, but her tone was guarded. "Hey, what's up?" she asked, trying to sound casual. I pressed her for information about Alex and Rachel, but she claimed she didn't know anything. I thanked her for her time and hung up the phone, feeling frustrated but not defeated. I had a feeling that there was more to this story than met the eye, and I was determined to uncover the truth. As I stood in the community center, surrounded by our friends and family, I felt a sense of unease growing inside me. Something wasn't right, and I was going to find out what it was. As I scanned the crowd, my eyes landed on Rachel, Alex's fiancé, who was frantically whispering to someone in the back. It was then that I noticed a small, familiar necklace glinting in the light, the same silver locket with a tiny photo of Alex and me on our first date that he'd given me as a gift 2 years ago. As I stared at the silver locket with the tiny photo of Alex and me on our first date, my mind racing to connect the dots, I remembered Rachel's cryptic apology earlier. It wasn't until I saw the locket that I realized why she had mouthed those words. It was because she was holding the same locket in her hand. I recalled now that Mike, Alex's best friend, had been whispering to her earlier, and how he had quickly looked away when our eyes met. I put 2 and 2 together. Mike and Rachel were involved in Alex's infidelity. The missing wedding ring made sense. It was a symbol of their own secret engagement. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized that Alex had been planning to leave me for Rachel all along. The photo in the locket was more than just a gift from Alex. It was a reminder of the two of them, a tangible connection to the relationship he was about to abandon. I thought back to the times Alex had gotten angry with me, and how he would often storm out of the room, leaving me wondering what I had done wrong. It wasn't me, it was him, caught in the web of his own deceit. The truth hurts, but it also explained everything: why he had been distant, why he had lied to me, and why he had chosen to leave me standing at the altar. The community center staff called the police, and soon Alex's fiancée, Rachel, was taken into custody for embezzlement, identity theft, and stalking. As I watched them lead her away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. The missing wedding ring and locket were evidence of their scheme to steal Alex from me. Mike, Alex's best friend, was also charged with aiding and abetting. Alex himself had already fled town, but he would eventually face charges for bigamy and emotional abuse. I decided not to press charges, but instead filed for divorce and obtained a restraining order against him. It was a difficult time, but I knew I deserved better. As I looked at the silver locket with our photo on it, now a symbol of their deceit, I felt a sense of sadness give way to anger. But most of all, I felt a sense of relief that I had escaped a toxic relationship and was moving forward into a brighter future. I work as an administrative assistant at a small marketing firm in downtown Seattle. My boss, Rachel, is always stressing about meeting deadlines and cutting costs, which can be stressful for me since I'm the one who has to handle the office supplies budget. I took a break from work last Thursday to pick up some new staplers at Staples, just down the street from our office. While I was waiting in line, I noticed a commotion outside near my coworker's car, which was parked in a visitor spot with a broken window. When my coworker came in to report the incident, I offered to pay for the repairs as a gesture of goodwill. That's when I saw a stack of invoices and financial reports belonging to our company's owner, Alex, poking out from under the passenger seat. I'm not sure what to make of it, but something doesn't feel right. I should have kept my mouth shut. I was browsing through the financial reports on my laptop, trying to find some discrepancies in our company's expenses, when I stumbled upon an entry that caught my eye. It was a reimbursement for a new laptop, supposedly purchased for our sales team, but the purchase date was several months earlier than what I remembered. The receipt attached showed it was bought from Best Buy, and the sales associate's name was Jamie Wilson. I pulled out my own laptop's purchase receipt from a year ago from the same store to compare, and the numbers didn't add up. Our company's owner, Alex, was always trying to cut costs, so why would he approve such an expensive purchase? I made a mental note to ask Rachel about it when she got back from her meeting. I started keeping a list of all the discrepancies I found in our company's financial reports. At first, it was just a few minor errors, but as I dug deeper, I noticed a pattern. Every time I requested an invoice for a specific vendor, the copy would be different from what was on file. The company's owner, Alex, claimed it was just a mistake, but I suspected something more. I decided to do some further research and started by looking up the sales associate who allegedly sold our company's owner, Alex, his new laptop from Best Buy. The name Jamie Wilson didn't ring any bells, so I asked Rachel about him during our morning meeting. She seemed hesitant to discuss it, but eventually she told me that Jamie was a relatively new employee at Best Buy and had only been working there for a few months. I wasn't convinced by her explanation, so I decided to do some more digging. I started by calling Best Buy's corporate office to ask about Jamie Wilson's employment status. They told me that he had actually worked there for over 2 years, not just a few months as Rachel claimed. I made a mental note to confront Rachel about this discrepancy later. Next, I began to analyze the financial reports more closely. I noticed that several large invoices were missing from our company's records, and when I asked Rachel about them, she seemed evasive. I started to feel like I was onto something big. I decided to pay a visit to Best Buy to see if I could get more information about Jamie Wilson. When I arrived at the store, I asked to speak to the manager, but he told me that Jamie was no longer working there. I asked him when Jamie had left, and he said it was about 6 months ago. This was even before Alex claimed to have purchased his laptop from Best Buy. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that Rachel's story was unraveling. I started to piece together the evidence, and it was starting to look like a cover-up of some sort. I decided to look into Jamie Wilson's background further. I opened the file on my laptop, and what I saw made no sense. A transaction from our company's bank account to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, stated the day before Alex claimed he'd fired his brother. The amount was for 100 zalazin, exactly the same as the cost of the new laptops. As I stared at the transaction on my laptop, I couldn't believe what I was seeing: a payment from our company's bank account to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, dated the day before Alex claimed he'd fired his brother. The amount was for 100 zalazin, exactly the same as the cost of the new laptop. Suddenly, everything fell into place. I remembered the discrepancy in the financial reports, the fake invoices, and Rachel's evasive behavior. It wasn't just a case of minor errors or a simple mistake. This was a deliberate cover-up, and I had unknowingly stumbled upon it. The shell company in the Cayman Islands was a front for Alex's brother's embezzlement scheme. The laptop purchase was just a small part of it. Rachel had been involved all along, using her position to help Alex cover their tracks. The weight of it all settled on me like a physical force. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, my breath knocked out of me. The fluorescent lights above our office seemed to flicker in sympathy, casting an eerie glow over the scene. I was no longer just an administrative assistant. I was a witness to corporate malfeasance, and I had the proof. I took a deep breath, trying to process the enormity of what I'd discovered. The company's owner, Alex, and his brother had been cooking the books for years, using our company's funds for their own gain. I walked into the police station, feeling a mix of emotions: anger, relief, and a sense of vindication. I had come prepared with all the evidence I had gathered, and the officers listened intently as I explained the situation. They thanked me for my diligence and assured me that they would investigate further. A few days later, I received a call from the police department informing me that Rachel and Alex had been charged with embezzlement and conspiracy to commit a crime. The company's funds had been recovered, and Alex's brother had been arrested and charged separately with multiple counts of theft. As for Rachel, she was given a plea deal, agreeing to cooperate with the authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. I wasn't surprised. Her behavior had been inconsistent from the start. The thought of the weight lifted off our company's shoulders was a small comfort. I returned to my desk, feeling a sense of closure and relief wash over me as I sorted through the aftermath. My boss, Rachel, was gone, but I was still working at the same marketing firm in downtown Seattle, trying to rebuild trust with our clients and restore order to our finances. 2 weeks later, I'm still trying to process the aftermath of everything that's happened. The post got a lot of attention, with many people commenting and sharing their own stories about similar experiences. I've since received a call from a detective at the police department, informing me that Rachel's cooperation has led to the recovery of even more company funds, which is a small miracle. I've also been thinking a lot about my own role in this whole ordeal and have come to realize that I need to be more vigilant in the future. I've started carrying a small notebook with me wherever I go, just in case I need to document anything suspicious. As for life outside of work, I've been spending more time with my family and trying to focus on the things that truly matter. It's funny how a traumatic event can put everything into perspective. I'm Rachel, a 27-year-old freelance writer living in a 2-bedroom apartment above my parents' garage in suburban Oakdale. My adoptive parents, Mark and Sarah, have been great about giving me space, but we still like to keep an eye on each other. I've got a reliable old Honda Civic, a 2012 Accord EXL with over 90,000 miles, which I affectionately call Bertha. She's seen me through 3 jobs, 2 long-distance relationships, and countless hours of writing in the passenger seat while my boyfriend, Alex, drove us around the city. Last week, on a Tuesday afternoon, I went to the local Home Depot in Oakdale to buy some new light fixtures for my living room. As I was browsing the aisle, I ran into my adoptive brother, Ben, who's been living with my parents since he got kicked out of his own place 6 months ago. He's always been a bit of a free spirit, and we get along okay, but I can tell something's been bothering him lately. When I asked what was wrong, he just shrugged and said he had a lot on his mind. I dropped the subject, but now I'm starting to wonder if there's more to it than just stress. Ben's always been tight-lipped about his past, and I've learned to respect his boundaries. Still, something about his behavior today has got me feeling like I'm missing a piece of the puzzle. I was on my way home from the library, where I'd spent the afternoon researching a new article for a local magazine, when I noticed something strange on my phone. I had a text message from my bank, alerting me to a new online transaction on my account. The timestamp was about an hour ago, but I knew I hadn't made any purchases since the morning. The amount was small, just $20, but it was the merchant that caught my eye. Walmart Supercenter 1234 in Oakdale. I couldn't remember buying anything from Walmart lately, and definitely not with my debit card. I started to feel a slight tickle of unease as I tried to recall if I'd used my card at Walmart. I remembered driving past the store last week on my way to Home Depot, but I was sure I hadn't stopped in. I pulled over at the next light and checked my account history online, but there was no record of the transaction. That's when I saw a small, almost imperceptible glitch in the scrolling feed of transactions. It looked like a minor bug, but something about it made me pause. I wondered if someone had accessed my account remotely. As I sat in my living room, staring at the Home Depot receipt for the light fixtures I'd purchased earlier that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Ben had been acting strangely, and now this transaction on my bank account had me wondering if someone was accessing my financial information remotely. I decided to investigate further and started keeping a list of all the unusual occurrences. I added the strange text message from my bank, the glitch in the scrolling feed of transactions, and the small, almost imperceptible delay when I tried to access my account online. I also recalled a conversation I'd overheard between Ben and my father, Mark, a few days ago. They were talking about something in hushed tones, and I caught the phrase, family dynamics, being mentioned. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now I wondered if there was more to it than just a casual conversation. I made a note to ask my parents about it later. As I continued to dig into this mystery, I started to notice other things that didn't quite add up. The brand new light fixtures I'd purchased looked identical to the ones I'd seen in Ben's old apartment when he first moved out. And then there was the strange phone call I'd received from a blocked number a few nights ago. The person on the other end had asked for me by name, but when I answered, they quickly hung up. I started to feel a sense of unease building inside me. Was someone trying to send me a message, or was this just a series of strange coincidences? I decided to do some research and started looking into public records to see if I could find any information about my biological family members. I scrolled through the list of registered sex offenders in our county, but nothing stood out as unusual. I also remembered that Ben had been acting strangely around the time I'd found the strange transaction on my bank accounts. He'd been muttering to himself and seemed distracted. And then there was the time he'd borrowed my car without asking, claiming he needed to run some errands. Ben's phone was on my coffee table, screen lit up from the inside out, with a text message blinking in bright red, "Come home now?" But it wasn't just any text, it was a photo of my adoption papers, and the name at the bottom read, Benjamin John Smith, son of Sarah and John. The text message on Ben's phone, the one that said, "Come home now," it was a photo of my adoption papers. I stared at the name at the bottom, Benjamin John Smith, son of Sarah and John, my adoptive parents. It was all coming together now. The strange transaction on my bank account, the new light fixtures that looked identical to the ones in Ben's old apartment, the phone call from a blocked number, it was all connected. I remembered the day my father, Mark, had told me about Ben's biological mother passing away when he was just a toddler. But there were no records of his biological mother. No obituary, no funeral announcement. I recalled the conversation between Ben and my father, mentioning family dynamics. It wasn't just a casual conversation. They knew about Ben's true identity. I felt a wave of nosy wash over me as I pieced together the truth. My adoptive brother Ben was not who he said he was. He was my biological half-brother. My father's brother had an affair with our mother, resulting in Ben. They had kept it a secret all these years, using my adoption as a cover story. The strange transactions on my bank account, the new light fixtures, it was all a way to create a paper trail, to make it look like Ben was living independently. But why? Why keep it a secret all this time? I remembered the way Ben would often glance at our mother with a mixture of sadness and longing in his eyes. It wasn't just sympathy, he knew who she really was to him. I felt a pang of sorrow, not for myself, but for Ben. He had been living a lie for so long, and now his secrets were coming out. It took me 3 days to gather the courage to confront my adoptive parents and Ben about the truth. When I finally sat them down in our living room, the weight of it all felt crushing. My father, Mark, broke down in tears, admitting they had kept Ben's true identity a secret for so long. They claimed it was to protect him from the shame of being born out of wedlock, but I knew that was just an excuse. Ben, my biological half-brother, looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He said he had been living in fear of losing everything, our family, our home, his sense of identity. I couldn't blame him. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a deep sadness for Ben and the life he'd been forced to lead. The police were called, and it was determined that my adoptive parents would be charged with concealment of birth and perjury. It was a small punishment, considering the damage they'd done, but it was a start. I decided to keep Bertha, my trusty old Honda Civic, as a reminder of the long and winding road that had led me to this place. As I packed up my things and moved out, I felt a sense of closure, like I was finally taking back control of my life. I'm still in shock 2 weeks later as I read through the comments on this post. The story has resonated with so many people, and I'm grateful for all the messages of support and solidarity. One thing that's become clear is that my adoptive parents' actions have had far-reaching consequences, and we're still waiting to see how the court will proceed on the concealment of birth charges. We've been notified that the trial date has been set for 3 months from now, and I'm trying to stay focused on the road ahead. As for me, I've started taking art classes at a local studio, something I've always wanted to try but never had the time for before. I find myself drawing more than ever, using it as a way to process everything that's happened. I'm not sure what the future holds, but for now, I'm just trying to stay grounded and take things one step at a time. I've been married to Alex for 5 years, and we're expecting our first child in just a few weeks. We live in a cozy 2-bedroom house in the suburbs of Denver, near the IKEA where I bought my entire living room furniture set last year. My husband has always been very close to his family, and he's always been the one to take care of his mother, who lives in assisted living nearby. In fact, he's been driving her to her doctor's appointments at least once a week for the past 6 months, ever since her hip replacement surgery. But what I don't know is that my husband has been keeping a secret from me, one that has nothing to do with his family, and everything to do with the woman who's supposed to be his grandmother. I've been noticing strange inconsistencies in his stories about her, but I've brushed them off as just old age creeping up on his mom. So now I'm starting to wonder if there's more to it than that. I was browsing through my husband Alex's phone records, and I noticed a strange number that kept popping up every week on the same day, Wednesday evening around 8:45 p.m. The calls were short, just under 5 minutes, but there were at least 5 of them scattered throughout the past 3 months. I asked Alex about it, and he said it was probably his mom's doctor calling to check in on her after her hip replacement surgery. But something didn't add up. His mom had a nurse who took care of her at home, and I remembered him telling me that they were supposed to start a new therapy session with a physical therapist named Rachel at the Sportsmed Clinic near our apartment complex on Thursdays. I checked the sportsman's schedule online, and there was no record of any appointments for Rachel on Wednesdays. Now, I'm starting to wonder if Alex is telling me the truth about his mom's medical care. I started keeping a list of every time Alex's mom was mentioned in conversation. It was a small notebook I kept on my bedside table, and I would jot down the date, time, and details of what he said. At first, it seemed like a harmless exercise, but as the days went by, I noticed inconsistencies in his stories. He would say she had a doctor's appointment on one day, but then claim she had gone to physical therapy on another. I asked him about it, but he just shrugged it off, saying he must have gotten the dates mixed up. One evening, I was browsing through my husband's phone records again, and I noticed a strange number that kept popping up every week on the same day, Wednesday evening, around 8:45 p.m. The calls were short, just under 5 minutes, but there were at least 5 of them scattered throughout the past 3 months. I asked Alex about it, and he said it was probably his mom's doctor calling to check in on her after her hip replacement surgery. I decided to look into the sports med clinic near our apartment complex, and discovered that they didn't have any records of appointments for Rachel, the physical therapist Alex mentioned. I also found out that the clinic had a new receptionist, Emma, who started working there 6 months ago, around the same time Alex began taking his mom to doctor's appointments. I started to feel uneasy, so I decided to pay a visit to the assisted living facility where Alex's mom lives. I asked the staff if they knew anything about her medical treatments, but they seemed hesitant to share any information. They did mention that Alex had been coming in regularly, but when I asked to speak with him, they told me he wasn't available. As I left the facility, I noticed a car parked outside with a familiar license plate number. It was the same make and model as Alex's truck. But what caught my attention was the sticker on the back window. Grandma's taxi? I hadn't seen that sticker before, and it seemed out of place on a vehicle that was supposed to be his mom's primary transportation. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through the photos I'd taken of Alex's mom's ID card at the assisted living facility, and then I saw a tiny note written on the back in handwriting that wasn't hers. It read, "Meet me at 8:45 p.m. every Wednesday." As I stared at the ID card in my hand, the words on the back written in Alex's mother's handwriting started to make sense. "Meet me at 18:45 p.m. every Wednesday." It was a familiar phrase, one that I had seen before, etched on a sticker on the back window of Alex's truck, the same one I had spotted outside the assisted living facility. The "Grandma's taxi" sticker was more than just a family joke. It was a hint at a deception that went far beyond mere lies about his mother's medical treatments. I remembered the first time Alex mentioned his mother's doctor calling him on Wednesdays, and how he quickly brushed off my curiosity when I asked for more information. Now, I realized that those calls were not to check in on his mom at all, but to meet with her in person. The inconsistencies in Alex's stories about his mother's treatment made sense. He had been lying about it being a medical treatment, but it was something far more personal. As I looked through my notes from the sports med clinic, I saw the name Emma, the new receptionist who had started working there 6 months ago, around the same time Alex began taking his mother to doctor's appointments. Emma's job was not just about answering phones. She was a key part of Alex's elaborate scheme. I took a deep breath, trying to process the revelation that my husband's grandma was actually a woman he had been secretly meeting every Wednesday evening. I called the police and reported my findings, providing them with the evidence I had gathered, including the ID card with the note on the back. The authorities launched an investigation, and soon Alex was taken into custody for his role in the deception. He was charged with identity theft and harassment, as he had been impersonating his mother to get her to agree to medical treatments. The judge gave him a year's probation and community service. I, meanwhile, sought a divorce, citing the breach of trust as grounds. As I looked back on the experience, I realized that I had been blind to the warning signs, but I was grateful for the chance to learn from it. I reflected on the "Grandma's taxi" sticker on Alex's truck and how it had seemed like a harmless family joke at the time. But now it stood as a symbol of the web of lies he had spun around me. I felt a sense of closure, and knowing that justice had been served and that I was finally free to move on. I've worked in private equity for over a decade, helping to take down corrupt CEOs and turning around struggling companies. My latest role was at Atlas Investment Partners, where I reported directly to Managing Director Alexander Ross. He's a well-respected figure in the industry, known for his sharp mind and impeccable suits from Brooks Brothers. I've worked with him for 3 years, and we've made a great team, or so I thought. Every Friday at 5 p.m., I'd stop by the Starbucks on 5th Avenue to pick up a venti iced coffee before heading home. It's become a habit, one that helps me unwind after a long week. Last year, my husband Tom and I celebrated our 5-year anniversary with a weekend getaway to the Hamptons. As we sat on the beach watching the sunsets, he mentioned how proud he was of my career progress, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride myself. But little did I know, something was brewing beneath the surface at Atlas. A nagging feeling has been growing inside me, like a small seed planted years ago. It's hard to explain, but it's as if I've been ignoring a faint warning sign on my dashboard, one that I should have kept an eye on long ago. I was reviewing the company's quarterly financial reports when I noticed a discrepancy in the expenses for our latest acquisition, a small retail chain called Boutique Bliss. The numbers just didn't add up. $10 in an unexpected consulting fees, paid to a shell company called Ross Enterprises LLC. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. I clicked on the link to see the breakdown of expenses and noticed that all that Ross Enterprises LLC invoices were dated within a 1-week period last month, around the time Alexander was out of town for a family emergency. He had mentioned it in a group email to the team, but I hadn't given it much thought. Now, the phrase kept echoing in my mind. Ross Enterprises LLC sounded just like Alexander Ross's name. I started to feel a shiver run down my spine as I realized that something didn't smell right. But I pushed the thought aside, thinking it was just paranoia after all. Alexander had an impeccable reputation. I started reviewing the company's financial reports in more detail, poring over every expense and transaction. I noticed that Atlas had invested heavily in a new software system for managing client data. The company had paid a whopping $200,000 upfront plus $10,000 per month in maintenance fees. But what caught my attention was that the contract was with a shell company called Rostech Solutions. I did some digging and discovered that Rostech was incorporated just last year, with Alexander Ross listed as the sole owner and CEO. The address listed was a P.O. box in downtown Manhattan. As I delved deeper, I found that Rostech had been hired by Atlas to manage their client relationships. But I couldn't find any information on what services they actually provided. I started to wonder if Rostech was just a front for Alexander's own business dealings. I made a note to look into Rostech's financials and see if there were any red flags. I decided to pay a visit to the P.O. box address listed for Rostech. When I arrived, I found that it was just a mailbox rental service. The person behind the counter told me that they had received several packages addressed to Rostech, but no one had ever picked them up. I asked if they had any records of Alexander Ross being associated with the P.O. box, and they shook their head. I started keeping a list of all the discrepancies I had found so far. I made a note to check the company's tax returns and see if there were any irregularities in the income reported. I also decided to look into Alexander's personal financials to see if he had any other business ventures or investments that might be connected to the embezzlement. As I continued to dig, I discovered that Rostech was not just a shell company, it was actually an LLC, and its sole purpose seemed to be to manage Alexander's own assets. I found a document listing Alexander as the sole owner of Rostech, and another one showing that he had transferred $100 million into the company's bank account just last quarter. I stared at the spreadsheet, my eyes frozen on one line. Alexander's monthly consulting fees had increased by 500% last quarter. I felt like I was staring into a mirror reflection of myself, but one that didn't belong to me. The numbers blurred together as my mind screamed, how could he be making 6 figures for consulting without any record of it? I stared at the spreadsheet, my eyes frozen on one line. Alexander's monthly consulting fees had increased by 500% last quarter. I felt like I was staring into a mirror reflection of myself, but one that didn't belong to me. The numbers blurred together as my mind screamed, how could he be making 6 figures for consulting without any record of it? I thought back to the company's new software system, Rostech Solutions. I remembered asking the person behind the counter at the P.O. box rental service if they had any records of Alexander Ross being associated with the P.O. box. They had shaken their head, but I had noticed that the mail was addressed to Rostech in a font that looked eerily similar to Alexander's personal stationery. Suddenly, it clicked into place. Rostech wasn't just a shell company. It was Alexander's own business venture, masquerading as a consulting firm. He had been embezzling funds from Atlas investors by inflating his own consulting fees. The consulting fees I had noticed earlier were actually payments to himself, laundered through Rostech. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized the extent of his deceit. The image of Alexander's Brooks Brothers suit suddenly looked like a costume, a carefully crafted facade hiding his true intentions. My eyes landed on a specific transaction, $1 million transferred from Atlas to Rostech last quarter. That was no consulting fee, it was a payola scheme. I walked into Alexander's office, the same one where we'd shared countless meetings and victories. But today, it was different. I had evidence, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. I called our internal compliance team, and they arranged for an investigation. Within weeks, the FBI was involved, and Alexander was arrested for embezzlement and wire fraud. He was charged with stealing over $5 million from Atlas investors, including our company's own funds. The court case was a blur, but I remember feeling a mix of emotions, sadness that it had come to this, anger at how long it took to uncover the truth, and a sense of relief that justice was finally served. After the verdict, I took some time off to recharge and reflect on what I had learned. I realized that my own sense of pride and accomplishment had been tainted by Alexander's deceit. I started to rebuild my relationships with my colleagues, and our company began to heal from the wounds inflicted by Alexander's actions. As I looked back on the experience, I remembered the faint warning sign on my dashboard. The nagging feeling that I had ignored for so long. I vowed to be more vigilant, to trust my instincts, and to never let myself get complacent again. I'm Sarah, and I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking about the $150,000 my husband Alex and I invested in Epic Tech last year. We put our life savings on the line, sold my sister's old sedan, a 20-year-old Honda Civic, to make the down payment on a small business loan from Wells Fargo in April. My mother-in-law, Karen, a retired accountant, vetted the financials and even spoke with Alex's business partner, Michaels, at least 5 times before we signed the papers. She's been calling me every week for months, asking how it's going, but I've been too ashamed to tell her the truth. The business was supposed to be a cutting, edge e-commerce platform for outdoor gear, but we're still waiting for our first sale. Michael's been evasive about our tax returns, and the last time Alex spoke with him, he said something about restructuring our investment. I should have kept asking more questions. I was going through our email account spam folder, and that's where I found a notification from our bank, Capital One, about a large transaction made on our joint account the previous Thursday at 9:47 p.m. I had no memory of logging in or making any purchases online. The transaction was for $1,500 to a company called Epic Shipping. I had never heard of them before. I tried to recall if Alex had mentioned anything about it, but he was out running errands with my mother-in-law, Karen. He always takes her to the Apple Store in Oakbrook Center on Fridays at 10:30 a.m. to help her pick out new iPhone cases. I started to feel a creeping sense of unease as I looked at the transaction history. Every single purchase made by Alex from our joint account had been labeled as Epic Tech or Pick Shipping. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off, but I pushed it aside, thinking maybe it was just a minor glitch. As I continued to investigate the suspicious transactions on our joint account, I started to notice that every single charge was made on a weekday evening, between 9 and 10 p.m. I asked Alex about it, but he brushed it off, saying he must have been busy with work-related activities during those times. I pressed him for more information, but he seemed evasive, like he was hiding something. I decided to dig deeper and started looking into the company that made the purchases, Epic Shipping. I searched online and found a business registration document from 2019, listing a registered address in a small office park in Schaumburg. But when I tried to verify the address with the local post office, they informed me that the office had been closed down 6 months prior. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that Epic Shipping might not be a real company at all. I started keeping a list of all the suspicious transactions, including the amounts and dates. I also made a note to ask Alex about his involvement with Michael, the supposed business partner. The next day, I received an email from Alex's phone number, but it was addressed to me, not him. The subject line read, "Update on Epic Tech." I opened the email, and my heart sank as I saw that it was from a company called Epic Shipping, the same one that had made all the suspicious transactions. The email claimed that there had been a delay in the project's funding, but that everything would be sorted out soon. I felt a mix of emotions: anger, frustration, and a sense of unease. I knew I had to get to the bottom of this, but I didn't know where to start. I decided to pay a visit to Michael's office in Oakbrook Center, hoping to get some answers. As I walked into the office building, I noticed that the security cameras outside seemed to be pointed directly at the parking lot, rather than the front door. I made a mental note to ask about that when I met with Michael. I started to feel like I was walking through a spider's web, and I didn't know which strand to pull to unravel the entire mess. But I was determined to get to the truth, no matter what it took. I was digging through Michael's office trash can when I found an empty folder with Alex's name on it, marked Epic Shipping, and dated last week. The folder itself was labeled as confidential, with a bright red sticker that said, "Do not recycle." But what really caught my attention was the tiny note attached to the folder with the words, "Interpol involved," scribbled in red ink. As I looked at the empty folder with Alex's name on it, I realized that Michael was more than just a business partner. He was a master manipulator, using our trust to further his own agenda. The words, Epic Shipping, meant nothing until I saw the email thread between Michael and Alex, discussing the logistics of shipping merchandise from their supposed warehouse in Schaumburg. But it was the date stamp on that email thread that made my heart sink. Every single exchange was made before we even invested in Epic Tech. They had been planning this scam together all along. The phone calls to Michael's office were not about restructuring our investment, but about keeping me and Alex distracted while they orchestrated the heist. The suspicious transactions on our joint account, just a clever way to launder their ill-gotten gains. So I remembered now Alex had always been vague about his work schedule on weekdays between 9 and 10 p.m., claiming he was busy with client meetings or project deadlines. But I knew now that those were the exact times they would use to transfer funds from our account to Epic Shipping's dummy accounts. The folder with the red sticker marked confidential. That was the proof I needed. I felt a wave of anger and disappointment wash over me as I realized that my husband had been complicit in this massive Ponzi scheme all along. The note about Interpol being involved. That explained why Michael's office in Oakbrook Center had such heavy security. They must have known the authorities were closing in. I took a deep breath, trying to process the enormity of what I had discovered. Alex and I had been living in a bubble, completely oblivious to the deceit that surrounded us. But now I knew the truth and it would change everything. I walked out of the police station with my head held high, feeling a sense of justice finally served. The scam artist, Michael, was arrested on the spot for wire fraud and identity theft. He had used our trust to launder millions from his previous scams. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, disappointment, but also relief that it was over. I remembered the folder with Alex's name on it, marked epic shipping, and how it led me to the truth. I thought about my mother-in-law, Karen, who had vetted the financials without seeing any red flags. She had been too trusting, just like me. I took a deep breath, trying to process everything that had happened. Alex and I were filing for divorce, and our family savings would never be the same. But as I looked out the window, I saw a glimmer of hope. The sunlight was shining on the trees, and the birds were singing. It was a new day, full of possibilities. I knew I would rebuild, but this time with caution and wisdom. It's been 2 weeks since the arrest, and I'm still in shock by how fast everything moved. Our post got over 10,000 comments, with many people sharing their own stories of being scammed. It's been heartening to see the community come together like this. We just received a call from my mother-in-law, Karen, who had a chance encounter with Michael's lawyer at a coffee shop. Apparently, he was trying to get her to drop the charges against Michael. The irony isn't lost on me. We've also been approached by a local TV station for an interview about our experience, which I'm still undecided about. As for us, Alex and I have finally started talking about co-parenting and splitting our shared assets. It's a long road ahead, but for now, I'm just taking things one step at a time, trying to rebuild my sense of trust in people and the world around me. I'm Emily, and I was married at the courthouse on Valentine's Day, but it wasn't exactly a surprise proposal. My fiancé, Ryan, had been planning it for months, and I'd even helped him pick out the ring. We were celebrating our 2-year anniversary over dinner at the Cheesecake Factory, and he surprised me by getting down on one knee during dessert. I said yes, of course. But what really caught my attention was the way Ryan mentioned that he had been keeping a journal about our relationship since the beginning. He pulled out this old leather-bound book from his jacket pocket and showed me the entry for our first date. It was dated exactly 3 years ago, to the day. I remembered that night vividly. We'd met at a coffee shop in downtown Portland, and he'd bought me a latte with extra foam. I've always been a sucker for a good cup of coffee, and Ryan knew it. He's always been the romantic type, but there was something about the way he spoke about our relationship that felt off. A little too rehearsed, maybe. I pushed the thought aside, thinking I was just being paranoid. But as we finished dinner and started making plans for our honeymoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan was hiding something from me. And then I saw it, a small inscription on the inside cover of his journal, in handwriting that looked nothing like his. It said, "For E with love." I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I tried to brush it aside as paranoia. We finished dinner and started making plans for our honeymoon, but every so often, my eyes would drift back to Ryan's journal. That's when I noticed something, a small coffee stain on the bottom corner of the page where he'd shown me the entry for our first date. I remembered that coffee shop in downtown Portland. We'd met there on a drizzly winter evening exactly 3 years ago. Ryan had bought me a latte with extra foam, and I'd been charmed by the way he'd carefully balanced it on the counter while he waited in line. But now, I wondered if maybe he'd gotten the stain on his shirt from a different coffee shop, one that wasn't the Cozy Cup, where we'd actually met. I pointed out the stain to Ryan, but he just laughed and said it was probably from when he'd spilled coffee on himself while reading in bed. I smiled, trying to let it go, but my mind was still racing with questions. Why had he kept a journal, anyway? And what was with the inscription inside, "For E with love"? I couldn't shake off the feeling that Ryan was hiding something from me. So, I started keeping a list of everything that didn't add up. The first entry was the coffee stain on his journal. He said it was probably from when he'd spilled coffee on himself while reading in bed. But I remembered that coffee shop in downtown Portland, and the way he'd carefully balanced the latte on the counter while waiting in line. I added that to my list. Later that night, I noticed that our anniversary dinner menu at the Cheesecake Factory was slightly different from what I had ordered online. They had used a different brand of cheese on our salads than what I remembered buying from the market down the street. I added that to my list too. The next day, I asked Ryan about the difference in menus, and he brushed it off as a mistake, but I knew he was hiding something. I started paying closer attention to every detail. I remembered that Ryan had mentioned his mother-in-law, Susan, was a huge fan of antique shops. But when I looked up their address online, it was actually an office building in downtown Portland, not an antique shop at all. I added that to my list. I also noticed that our wedding invitation, which we had sent out just a week ago, had a small typo on the RSVP card. Ryan swore he hadn't ordered them, but I knew he was meticulous about details like that. I added it to my list. I started going through old photos on my phone, and I noticed that the same model of camera appeared in a few pictures from our vacation in Hawaii last year, but Ryan had never mentioned owning that exact camera before. I decided to investigate further and made a few discreet calls to some acquaintances who worked at the Cheesecake Factory. They confirmed that our anniversary dinner menu was indeed custom, made for us, and they remembered Ryan asking for a specific type of cheese that wasn't on their regular menu. I added that to my list. I also remembered that Ryan had mentioned his brother, Alex, was a huge foodie and loved trying new restaurants. I pulled out the old security footage from our anniversary dinner at the Cheesecake Factory. But what caught my attention wasn't Ryan's proposal, it was the woman in the background, sipping coffee, who looked uncannily like me, but with a different name tag. The woman in the security footage was me, but not my name Emily. The real E had been planning our entire relationship with Ryan, down to the smallest details. I remembered the coffee shop in downtown Portland. But it was where we staged our first meeting, not a real date. The camera he used on our vacation in Hawaii was his, and he'd taken those pictures to create a convincing narrative for us. And that journal, he'd written every entry himself, including the ones he said were from me. The inscription inside wasn't for me, it was for Emily, the mastermind behind the whole operation. She'd been using my name, my kodos, and even our shared interests to create an illusion of a real relationship. Ryan's proposal at the Cheesecake Factory was just another part of the plan, a carefully scripted moment to make it seem like I was the one falling in love with him. I felt like I'd been living in a dream, and now I was waking up to the reality that my entire relationship had been a lie. I filed a police report for stalking, harassment, and identity theft, and Ryan was arrested the next day. The investigation revealed that he had been planning our relationship for months, using his knowledge of my interests and preferences to create an illusion of a real connection. He had even gone so far as to create a fake journal with entries that seemed to be from me, in an attempt to convince me that we were meant to be together. The authorities found evidence of his schemes at every turn, from the custom-made anniversary dinner menu to the fake photos on our vacation in Hawaii. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a sense of closure and relief. As I watched Ryan being led away in handcuffs, I realized that I had been living in a dream world, and now I was waking up to reality. I knew that I would never be able to trust anyone like that again, but I was grateful for the experience, which had taught me to be more cautious and aware in my relationships. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace wash over me as I began to rebuild my life. 2 weeks later, I'm still trying to process everything that's happened. Our post got a lot of attention, with many of you offering kind words and advice. Thank you for that. Since Ryan's arrest, the police have been keeping me updated on their investigation, and last week we had our first court date set for July 15th. The DA will be present to discuss the charges, and I'll be testifying in person. It's a lot to take in, but I'm trying to stay focused on my own healing and growth. I've started seeing a therapist to work through some of the emotional fallout, and I've also been exploring new hobbies to fill the void left by our relationship. As for Ryan, it seems he's being held without bail until trial. I'm told the evidence against him is overwhelming. I'm just trying to take things one day at a time and trust that justice will be served.